Hey guys, my name is Chris Lanning and welcome to this week's episode of The QC Show. Today I'm speaking with my good friend Shashwati Talukdar about her filmmaking career and her playwriting career. Enjoy. When you and I first met, it was a couple years ago, and we were both working on some film projects. And I wanted to talk to you about, your experience in film, because we're both in countries that are not our home countries. And we both have history in film, and yet here we are in kind of this foreign place. How did you get started in Taiwan?
Well, so Taiwan is my second foreign place because I was born in India and went to school there and worked there actually before I moved to the States to get a MFA degree from Temple University in Philadelphia. And I stayed on and was working in the States. And then I moved to Taiwan. So Taiwan is my second foreign country. And I've continued working in film and video the entire time.
And so how did you get started in video here? Because if I understand correctly, you don't speak the language fluently, but somehow you're here and you're doing it.
Yes. So what happened was I found that I had to sort of redefine myself and sort of restart. And the way I did it was that I became more of an independent filmmaker instead of sort of working for other people, which is what I had been doing in New York City. And I was mostly editing there and doing some producing and also making my own films. And that's what allowed me to sort of change over to being an independent filmmaker when I moved to Taiwan, because I couldn't edit here because of the language barrier, and producing jobs would be few and far between. And I mean, I did a few little things of sort of people coming through and then they needed something. But, without the language skills, you really couldn't work in the industry in quite that way. So I became more of an independent filmmaker, and what that meant was I started doing more work actually back in India and like flying back there off and on to shoot and to do my own producing, meaning like raising my own money, filming, editing. And Taiwan sort of became the base for editing and writing. But slowly over time, as my language skills got better, I've started working with other people as well. And I just had a documentary come out, which was broadcast all over Asia. Was paid for by Korean television, and it just played in the public television here, PTS. So I'm doing a little bit more of working with 4 other people than I used to, but, more or less remained an independent filmmaker since I moved to Taiwan.
That's right. And the name of that documentary, of your short film, I should say, is...
It's The Boss, and it just got broadcast, I think, last month or something like that.
Right, and that's in Chinese.
That's completely in Chinese. And that was my first sort of Chinese language film that wasn't sort of a small art project or something like that, because I've made like experimental films that that was with people here and crews here, but those projects were sort of art video and experimental video. But this was a something that was for broadcast and sort of very much sort of within the television industry.
And working from the editing perspective, did you find it difficult editing where they're speaking Chinese?
It was a very interesting experience because I found that I couldn't edit if I didn't have all the transcripts. And most projects will actually, anything that's professional will have transcripts. What I found was that I was actually able to function quite well as long as I had the transcripts in front of me, because I could calibrate my comprehension of the language according to what was written, because if I had a problem with a word, I could just look it up. But if you told me to work on something like just completely raw without transcripts, I probably would have a very difficult time.
And those transcripts are in Chinese?
They were all in Chinese, because actually I found that working in translation is next to sort of useless, because you don't actually get the proper nuances. You don't really quite understand what's happening and where to cut, because you're cutting according to English, and then you're completely at the mercy of how good or bad the translation is. So it's a very bad way to work, I think.
The Boss, if I understand correctly, it's a documentary about an obnoxious boss, right?
Well, it's yes, obnoxious is correct. It's a documentary about a sort of how should I put it? Little on the rough side, sort of somewhat gangster related middle-aged man from Taiwan, who kind of things became a little hot for him here in Taiwan. So then he went over to China and, lived off his prostitute girlfriend for a while and did all sorts of other things, and then got into real estate, was, trying to make it big in business over there, sort of, mostly legitimate. And the film sort of followed him over a couple of years as he tried to sort of get this big deal, the biggest deal of his life, to get it sort of going, something that would have allowed him to sort of just retire or something. So we sort of see what that's like. And so it's very interesting. I learned a lot of Chinese, curse words.
Oh, right. And it's not really a circle that you usually travel in.
No, I don't know a lot about Taiwanese or Chinese gangsters, though apparently I live in an area that has a bad reputation, quote unquote bad.
Oh, in Wanhua.
Yes, but it all seems very benign to me. After living in New Delhi and New York, it all seems very mild.
Right. Do you think that because you're a foreigner and even a woman, that might have had any influence as to why you got to work on a project like this?
No, I don't think it had anything to do with any of that, frankly. What it was is the producer and director needed somebody who would be able to work with story. Because documentaries typically will have lots and lots of footage, and often it's very hard to see how to sort of structure it and how you can sort of tell a coherent story that will actually reflect what the director wants to convey and what the subject matter there is in front of your that's sort of unfolding. They needed somebody who had those skills, and so that's how I sort of got on the project. So I don't think it had anything to do with being a foreigner or being a woman. It's just really just, for once, it was just having this particular skill set that actually worked for me.
I asked that question because they might be afraid of a local person who might not want to, let's say, edit in a way that exposes this person doing, notorious things. And you're a taskmaster. You're a boss. So yourself. So perhaps they thought it might be easier.
That's an interesting thought, because I believe the subject of the film actually saw the film and was very unhappy, and not because of what you think. He was unhappy because there was a scene of him in a karaoke bar being very drunk with his mistress and best friend, sort of acting pretty wildly, and that's what apparently upset him. Not any of the other stuff. The other stuff, he was just fine. So you just never know, what buttons you're pushing. But yeah, maybe that did have some, now that you sort of are saying it, maybe the fact that I'm sort of an outsider made the producer and director more comfortable with with the fact that I wasn't going to self-censor in some way, and you'd have to ask them, but yeah, maybe there's a little bit of that.
So you're truly an international filmmaker. You've got America, you've got New York, you've got India, and you've got Taiwan. Is there anything of the three places that you notice is different with filmmaking? Is there anything in particular that stands out?
Oh yeah, that's all three places are really, really different in terms of sort of like working style and how things kind of happen. So the Indian industry is completely different from the American one, and Taiwan falls somewhere in between. And then the working style of people is very, very different in all three countries. So in India you'll typically have like enormous number of people working on your film, but then it'll turn out that only like maybe 10% of them can actually sort of do the work. And then in America, like everybody just seemed to work too much. I mean, I don't know, Americans just work too hard, or maybe it's just a New York thing. And you could sort of schedule your day and your work and your time according to that. And in Taiwan, it seems to be somewhere in the middle. Like for example, like all the assistants I've had here are just sort of like excellent, but and they're very hardworking and they're actually very, very good. But then they don't seem to be able to take a lot of independent decisions by themselves, which was not true of New York, and which is actually kind of like sometimes true and sometimes not true in India. So it's a very different working environment.
The other thing too, this documentary is not, from what I understand, it's not your typical genre. I'm interested in your interest in sci-fi.
Yeah, I love actually editing documentaries and actually also making them, because there's just something wonderful about people letting you into their lives and letting you sort of be there and talk to them and find out about them. And then I love editing documentaries because it's such a challenge to tell a story with just so much material, which just doesn't sort of like naturally kind of fall into place. I find that as I started writing more and more, because of being in Taiwan and not being able to be an editor and producer anymore, really in the industry sense, I started writing much more, and then my interest like actually led me to sci-fi, and I realized like science fiction is oddly marries my love for things that are sort of fantastic and full of imagination, and it marries it to some very real concerns of the real world, which is what often like documentary is able to do very well. So yes, it oddly enough it's a very good extension of my love for documentary.
Hey guys, well that's it for another episode of the QC Show. And as always, thanks for listening. Please feel free to leave any comments and tell us what you think about the show. Specifically, if you're a filmmaker or even a playwright who is international, working in 2 or 3 or even more countries, let us know what you think and what your experiences are like. That's it. Thanks, guys.